Well, thank you all for joining this session, both offline and online. Today we have three distinguished panelists, leaders of tourism industry, both from the policy development and business perspectives. David Atkinson on your left is, as you know, chief architect and advisor on Japan's tourism since 2012, the second administration of Abe-san. And he has advised the government, including former Prime Minister Suga and Japan National Tourism Organization on policy development and execution. Satoko in the middle is a luxury tourism expert, and she's working both as a travel designer as well as a luxury hotel consultant. And Taku, to my left, is the thought leader and business leader on adventure tourism, running Churaboshi, in another name, Satoyama Experience. He also opened a luxury hotel last year. And I myself, Taku Mezawa, is chairing the government committee on luxury tourism development. And I am closely working with David and Satoko on that committee. I am also co-leading a project to develop adventure tourism content with the Japan Tourism Agency and cultural tourism content with Agency for Cultural Affairs Japan. My team, it's a private sector organization, has worked on more than 100 tourism content development over the past 3 years. So as you know, Japan's inbound tourism market disappeared due to the pandemic. Since early last year, and we don't know yet when the borders will open fully. But Japan continues to be among the kind of top ranking list of wanna-go destinations among many global media. And meanwhile, the domestic market has seen a very interesting development over the past 2 years, including microtourism, workation, and development of the domestic luxury tourism market as well. So now we have a new administration under Prime Minister Kishida, and Kishida-san secured just a few days ago the public support. So in view of these new realities and global trends, the purpose of this session is really discussing how we should be upgrading or redefining Japan's tourism, both inbound and domestic going forward. With that, the first question goes to David. We'd like to know we'd like to have some insight into the timing and the pattern of recovery of the Japan's tourism market.
Yes, well, the answer to that is nobody knows, no idea. In theory, UN, WTO, and the global consensus is that borders have already started opening in some countries, and that at the beginning of the year, next year, January, February time, there should be more and more countries which are opening up. It's much easier for Europe, of course, to open up than it is for other parts of the world because it's a single market, and it's actually quite difficult to stop people from moving between countries within the borders of the EU. The US has already announced its plans for how it's going to open its borders. To my knowledge, there is no plan at the moment, since the government just changed, as to how they will open the borders. As far as I know, there is still nobody working on how that will be done. Although the tourism agency has its own views on it. The most difficult part of it, of course, is going to be how they deal with vaccinations. At the end of the last government, I was reasonably successful in getting them to use an EU-based travel passport rather than the US version. For those of you who are aware of this, the US uses vaccination, not vaccinated, as the basis of their vaccination passport. The EU uses, have you fully recovered? Have you had a PCR test within the last 72 hours, or have you been vaccinated? It's a much more broad-based thing. And the Japanese government has has adopted that standard, thank God, because it makes it a lot easier for people to move around. But exactly how the borders will open, nobody knows. In theory, by 2023, 2024, in revenue terms, we should be back probably to where we were in 2018, 2019. But the numbers will be lower than the revenues will be. And the main reason for that is that mass tourism at the bottom end is probably never going to recover to the levels that we saw pre-COVID-19, or at least I hope it never recovers to the levels that we saw pre-COVID-19. And the main reasons for that, of course, obviously the obvious ones. It's difficult to accommodate that, but to shove people into planes the way they were doing before 2019. And at the same time, you related to that, you've seen an enormous reduction in capacity. A number of cheap flight airlines have gone bust. There will be fewer large cruise ships than there were before. And the supply reduction means by definition that there will be fewer people moving than we saw before 2019. So probably by 2023, 2024, we'll be making as much money as we were before, but we'll be making it off a smaller number of people.
So you're saying the smaller number of people, but about the same level of revenues?
Yeah, revenues are predicted to be about 4% higher, but total the total number of people moving is expected to be about 8% less.
8% less
than where we were in 2019.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And actually, the part of the makeup, of course, is that globally domestic tourism is probably going to be much larger than it was before COVID arrived.
Well, maybe I have a question for you all. Have you traveled more frequently in Japan compared with the pre-COVID era? Raise your hand. Well, some of them, yeah. And I'm one of them too. So many actually luxury travelers are rediscovering many destinations inside the country. And that is happening in probably all countries worldwide. Satoko, Taku, do you have any views on this? Yeah, or patterns. Yeah.
All right. In terms of timing, I can only say based on wishful thinking, I'm hoping sometime during the summer of 2022, which everybody is expecting. When it comes to luxury travel agents outside of Japan, they're asking, when can we go back to Japan to travel when they're already in the Northern European countries this summer? And I said, sorry, Japan's not ready. So we'll hopefully this summer, well, upcoming summer.
At least you are receiving a lot of inquiries.
Yeah, actually, it really depends on just the border control of Japan. I had some negotiation session with a travel agency last week. That there's a big demand too. They really want to come to Japan. So basically, Satoyama experience and the guests are coming from the mainly like a Western country. So yeah, it's a big demand from the Western country for sure.
Maybe you should briefly explain what exactly Satoyama experience is.
Okay, actually we run the Satoyama experience since 2010. And actually we were activity provider based in the Hida Takayama. Mainly like cycling tour, easy cycling tour, like half-day cycling tour. But the last year we also implemented an accommodation service called Satoyama Stay. So we just integrated into like activity and accommodation as well. And then so we will make like a total solution provider for who is seeking to like a local experience in Japan.
What was the customer composition like before COVID?
Well, I think I have talked with some of the agency based in the EU, and they really focusing. I mean, I think the demand for the countryside of Japan is getting higher compared to like previous COVID.
No, my question is, what is the share of the source of origin in terms of your customer portfolio for
Portfolio?
Satoyama experience?
Okay, so 95% of our guests are coming from overseas. And in 95, I think we have like a top 3 countries, UK, US, and Australia. Yeah.
So a lot of people from Europe and Australia. Yeah, because that your product is something really about the culture and nature of Hida, Takayama, and Furukawa. Yeah, that makes sense. So next question for all is what changes we should be looking at when we view the post-COVID tourism? What changes are particularly important for us to consider? Maybe Satoko first.
I don't know if this is a change or if this has been a demand or a trend in the global world, but as far as I understand, Japan is very behind when it comes to sustainable travel. So the keyword sustainability is out there with everybody putting on the badges, but in reality, who really understands sustainability? So when I, as a travel designer, think about sustainability, it's actually about giving transparency on the supply chain. So if you were to stay at a property at a hotel in a rural side of Japan, you want to know the story about where is this fish coming from? Where's this fishable coming from? So that itself will give a story and a way to connect for the travelers to understand that specific region. So it's not just about getting rid of plastic and all the environmental sustainability efforts. It's really creating this cycle to support the local region and really enhance what they are strong in and providing the story. So I do believe and hope that Japan will start to reshape their tourism model into more sustainable models.
Is it the same concept as responsible tourism?
Yes, responsible tourism can be another word to explain that.
And is it only about the source of supply chain of the tourism?
No, not at all. It's really a holistic experience. So it's all about how do you introduce the locals, what's their mindset when it comes to the craftsmen. Those are the key things that will actually touch the heart of the travelers. And that's what they're looking for, something unique in Japan that they cannot find elsewhere.
Thank you. Taku, how do you see it?
Well, I totally agree with Satoko. I think I don't think there's a big change for like a related like COVID-19 because Japanese people really care about infection, and so we really do that. So compared to like the Western country, our percentage is quite low. So they recognize Japan as like a safe country to travel, even in Japan. I mean, especially in Asian country. So like Satoko said, I think sustainable tourism, sustainability is the key component to run the travel business in Japan, because Western country really focusing on how to maintain the global, planet. So in terms of the travel industry, we have like a GSTC, Global Sustainable Tourism Council. So we have like a global standard. So when I build up the Satoyama stay, we really try to follow that procedure. Like Satoko said, so maybe it's like a complicated process to get certified by GSTC. So not only power supply, like not only like a food, but also like when I build up like accommodation, I try to use the local material like beams and also craftsmanship, and it's like and then and then traveler really want to see that, and then they try to choose like accommodation or destination or some of the service. They need to think about how sustainable we are running. Yeah.
David, any thought on maybe additional issues?
Again, to use the UNWTO, the analysis at this point suggests that Asia will be the last market to fully recover, which is actually quite bizarre because as Taco mentioned, this Asia overall has had lower infection and death rates than is true for Europe and the Americas. And at the danger of being politically incorrect about it, there's a very good reason for that, because global pandemics, certainly for recorded history for the last 2,500 years, have a very significant likelihood to have started in Asia. In fact, around about 80% of all global pandemics have started in Asia. The Black Death in Europe started in Asia. There's an enormous number of pandemic diseases that have started for whatever reason in Asia. And if you look at the death rates around the world, you can see that playing out, because for obvious reasons, since modern medicine is only a product of the last 100 years or so, all of our Asian participants in the room are said in the academic data to have much stronger disease resistance than we do, which is why those rates are so low. So in theory, you would expect more people to come to Asia, because the likelihood of you being infected is lower than if you were to be somewhere else in the world. But that doesn't seem to show up in the data, which is unfortunate, but it doesn't show up in the data. For Japan, going back to the points I was making a few minutes ago, given that the bottom end of the mass tourism market is probably, certainly for the foreseeable future, not going to be coming back in the same way that it was before, that has implications for the rest of the world in a way that it doesn't have implications for Japan, because the Japanese tourism strategy was never based on the mass market in the first place. The upper end of the mass market was certainly part of the Japanese strategy, but the bottom end of the mass market never was. And therefore, what's happening globally is that the rest of the world's tourism strategies are moving closer to the Japanese tourism strategy than the Japanese strategy is moving to the rest of the world. And actually, as I was mentioning earlier on, it doesn't make that much of a difference, because the bottom 10% of the tourism market only provides between 2 and 2.5% of the revenues. So from that perspective, you lose 10%, but you only lose 2 to 2.5% of the revenues. And therefore, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. And so this whole question of sustainability and over-tourism and all the rest of it, it has basically been resolved for the foreseeable future by what's happening as a result of COVID. And so from that perspective, I think the likelihood is, I think there's a reasonable likelihood that the 2030 40 million people tourism target, whilst it may actually not be formally revised down, will probably be revised down to somewhere between 35 and 38. That's my guess. But other than that, I think there will be very few changes to the way that strategy has been thought of in Japan to date.
So the target revenue from inbound tourism probably will stay the same.
Actually, I think that will probably come down too, but because it was, the 2018-19 numbers were not indicative of the 2020 and 2030 targets being achievable. And so I think even if they keep them there, I think the likelihood that strategy is focused on hitting those numbers is probably has definitely decreased, and those numbers, I think, will probably, at least informally, not be the objectives that the new government uses.
Yeah. Well, for your information, the actual revenue from inbound tourism in 2019 was 4.8 trillion yen, and the target for 2020 was 8 trillion yen, which was missed, of course. And the target for 2030 was 15 trillion yen. So it was a quite aggressive target in terms of upgrading the customer portfolio of inbound tourism. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. What should we be doing to reshape Japan's tourism? Maybe Tak first.
Well, I think what we need to do from now on would be just, I think the word tourism and kanko in Japanese, I think I have a difference in between tourism and kanko. Kanko is like some of the business for the only domestic market. And
Kanko is the Japanese translation of tourism.
Yeah.
But you're saying that these two are different.
Yeah, that these two are different. So we need to see the global industry or global market and to adjust our service to fit to the global needs. So demand from the domestic market is big different between the not normal, but I think the experienced traveler is based in a Western country and they really want to spend the time and the money at the destination. But most of the service, including accommodation, food, and like our experience, is not fit to their demand. So we need to learn from the other country, which we need to provide, and then do it. So I think we need to see the global industry, not only in Asian, but also like the UK and everywhere.
Well, can you elaborate on the difference?
Well, I think the like a long stay. So if you go into like a nature, like a national park, if you go to like a US, there's a national park and nice accommodation like a lodge, and we also have like activity like a trekking guide, and we have like many paths or trekking route we can just go in. But here in Japan, national park, we have some trail in the Japan Alps nearby our region, but there's no not good accommodation up there. So even though the natural asset is quite nice, but the business sector is not that fit to that, quality of that, the natural asset, something like that.
Thank you. It's a very important point. Maybe Satoko, can you explain what our project is doing to develop accommodations?
Yes, currently Tech and I are working with the Japan Tourism Agency to develop luxury properties around Japan, mostly focusing on rural Japan. We do think that accommodation is one of the bottlenecks when it comes to inviting travelers to the rural side of Japan. Without a proper accommodation, we cannot have them spend several nights at a certain destination. So what we're doing at the moment is identifying potential properties or land that could be used to develop a luxury hotel. I'm not talking about a 100-key, the Ritz-Carltons of the world, but depending on the destination, the rural side of Japan is in need of comfortable and well-serviced accommodation. So we are still in the midst of looking for the appropriate land, but hopefully we will be able to see many more properties in Japan to accommodate luxury travelers.
Thank you. And David, you all started this, but you have said many times that Japan really lacks the truly luxury accommodations or luxury service. Can you explain that?
Yeah. When the current tourism strategy started five years ago, I was not supportive of the idea of developing a luxury tourism market at that point, although there were people who argued for it, and I argued against it. And the reason for that was, if you look globally at the development of tourism, it generally starts from the bottom. The standard example that's always given is Bali. It was, the hippies and the backpackers arrived, and then they were followed by, hippie and backpacker people who stayed there and built hotels and started up things, and then later on you got the luxury hotels that began to move in, and then it became a tourist attraction. And that has been, whether you look at the Seychelles or whether you look at the Bahamas, I mean, that's been the standard development across the world for, at least for rural tourism. And so when we started this, when we started the new strategy, we argued that, you really probably, at best, you needed to start with the middle market. And if you could build a base with the middle market, then you could work your way up. And it was only 2 years ago that certainly I started thinking about, well, maybe we've got to the point where you can start thinking about the luxury market. And, for those of you that know the history, the main reason that I argued for that progression was the simple fact that basic infrastructure was not available. There was nowhere for you to plug in your phone to charge it up unless you went to your hotel. There was no free Wi-Fi. The toilets were generally speaking Japanese style and certainly not at the level that you would expect for us. I mean, the basic infrastructure was just not there. The English getting through the airport within a reasonable period of time, none of these things were there. And the argument was, well, if you can't do, at least my argument was, if you can't do that, then trying to develop a luxury market in the absence of basic infrastructure would be a failure from the start and would probably set you back over time, because those people would form a very negative view of the Japanese tourism infrastructure, and that would probably go around the world. 2 years ago, we started, once we built out the middle market and we got up to 32 million people. Once you've got sort of 20-30 million people coming through, then you can start thinking about building out a luxury tourism market. And that's really when we started. And the argument, of course, for that was, which is what Sato said, my argument at the time was, well, you can build as many activities and you can get so wildly excited about how beautiful the Japanese, the Japanese countryside is. But if you can only offer a hotel that costs 6,000 yen a night, then these people are never going to come. And generally speaking, my experience and our analysis showed that generally speaking, the luxury tourist market, the first thing they look for is accommodation. They don't start by looking at experiences and start looking at, Instagram photographs. They look for, where am I going to stay? And once they've decided where they're going to stay, they decide what they're going to do after they've decided where they're going to stay. And at that point, I forget exactly what the numbers were. I think there were 28 five-star hotels in Japan. There are 42 in Bali. There are about 250 in most European countries, and the US has 750. And I think it's deeply questionable how many of those, now 34, I think, how many of those 34 Japanese five-star hotels are actually five-star hotels. The actual definition of a five-star hotel versus a three-star hotel has nothing to do with how many chandeliers and how much marble you have. It's not the basis of the of the evaluation. The difference between a three-star hotel and a five-star hotel is the quality of the people who work there. Mm-hmm. And Japanese developers and Japanese hotel chains have this view that you slap Ritz-Carlton on the door and you produce Appa Hotel service and you take a whopping great big profit margin out of that, and that is a sustainable model. And within the constraints of supply within Japan, that is a sustainable market for Japanese people, apart from wealthy Japanese people who won't stay there because they go overseas because they know what a real five-star hotel is. And that is a constant problem here. Is we had this with Kyoto and their new five-star hotel, which I won't mention, but this was one of the complaints that came directly to me. You go to the concierge and you say, well, I'm from Hong Kong. massively wealthy, going to have a wedding in Kyoto. Wife wants to get her nails done because, you know, she's heard so much about how wonderful Japanese manicures are. And she goes to the hotel concierge and says, where can I go for a manicure? And the concierge says, I don't know. And he says, well, can you find out for me? No. So they leave and go somewhere else. Funnily enough, actually, there is one of Kyoto's most famous manicure places on the other side of the road.
Wow.
From the entrance to the hotel. So it's not as if you could miss it. And that has been my constant message to people. You know, you can build a beautiful hotel, but you need really, really well-trained, well-paid staff. And if you don't get the staff, it's not a 5-star hotel.
Well-trained staff who can provide personal-based service, not manual-based. Yeah. Satoko, maybe can you fix that?
Where should I begin? Oh gosh. Well, the issue about service in Japan, well, of course, Japanese people are very serious and they do want to follow rules. So once you set up a rule, they will just follow it no matter what. So it's not about flexibility anymore. It's more about, okay, how do I follow the rule and try to prevent receiving any complaints? So the mindset of a hotelier in Japan is quite different. But if you could imagine, if the owner of a ryokan, a prominent ryokan in maybe Mie, received that request from a VIP guest, that person, that owner could probably just make a few phone calls and arrange all of that. So it's not actually impossible to provide those kind of services. It's just that somebody needs to kind of teach the people. It's not about just omotenashi. Japanese omotenashi, the hospitality in Japan is kind of a one-way thing, which is also a problem that we need to focus on. But I still have very high hopes that the local accommodation, ryokans, if they could become upgraded, and if they have this hint of what service is all about, we do have a huge opportunity that we can provide one-of-a-kind services in Japan.
Thank you. So let's move on to maybe potentially other issues. We have spoken about accommodations. We have talked about service and hospitality. Any other issues we should be working on at this point? David?
Well, I think this issue of service is a big one. Because you see it's prevalent throughout Japanese society, and it's not an issue the first time people come here, but it is an issue the second time they come here.
Right.
And it becomes a bigger issue every time they repeat. Globally, about 70 to 80% of all tourism is repeat visitors. And therefore, it becomes an issue. I mean, I think for a lot of us who are not Japanese, when you first come to Japan, everything works so well and everything is so clean and everything arrives exactly when it's supposed to arrive, and it's wonderful. And you think, wow, this is incredible. And then you start, as you live here long, you start bumping up against this incredible rigidity. And it becomes annoying. And then it becomes deeply annoying. And then you get over it. And you just give up and say, well, you know, it's never going to change. It's just the way it is. And so there's no point being frustrated about it because it doesn't change. It doesn't change. But that is going to be a problem. And the funny thing is, it's not difficult, right? Because as you say, you just make a few phone calls. You're not going to die as a result of doing that. It's really not that hard. But for whatever reason, people just don't want to do it. And that, I think that the difficulty, certainly from the perspective of government policy, is you can put in Wi-Fi and you can build hotels, or at least you can allow people to build hotels and you can back fund them and various other sort of things. The government is very, very able to create physical infrastructure. But the thing you can't change, or it's very, very difficult, it's very difficult to change people's mindset. And at some point, this is going to be I think, an issue, and it is an issue that you see for the repeat market. For JNTO, the government travel organization which I work for, that is actually a serious problem, which is that the number of repeaters you get maybe up to 3 times, but it's quite difficult to get beyond 3 times. Other than that, I think the basic strategy is working quite well. I think the implementation is I have some issues, but they're not major issues, and they're issues that get resolved. And I think, as we all know, I mean, the difficulty with Japan generally is to get it to move. Once it's moving, it's actually that's not the problem, because it, generally speaking, when we ask people do this, you spend 6 months fighting with them as they come up with 3,500 reasons as to why they can't do it. But once you've got beyond that and you get them to buy into doing it, they will do it, and they'll do it efficiently, and they will do it well, and it will get done. Moving them is the real problem. But once you've done that, I think there are very few issues in that regard. So I don't think there are significant issues. I think there's a deliverance problem, and hopefully Sato and other people, it's one of those things. If somebody gets it right, then probably things will begin to change. But it's a mindset, and that is difficult.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to bring another topic which is highly related to what Satoko mentioned earlier. It is type of tourism we like to develop. Last year, working with the Japan Tourism Agency, my team and the association published a report basically saying that we should connect tourism, cultural development, and community development in a destination. What we see as a reality is the disconnection between the 3, but we really need to connect the 3 elements. More practically speaking, for example, a sophisticated tourist likes to visit the destination and community where the local people are having a good lifestyle and enjoying their life. And the tourist wants to connect with the local people who have that kind of lifestyle. And they like to see an authentic local culture, not the cultural show some big company produces. And he or she likes to make some good contribution to the local society if opportunity is available. And if good relations between the tourists and the local people are established, they are more than likely to be a loyal repeater to the destination. That's the kind of tourism we should be developing. Taku, maybe you are the first mover on that kind of trend.
I've been working more than 10 years now, and I think Satoyama Experience is one of the the provider which provide the services which you mentioned. But I also involved many projects in other parts of the rural area in Japan. It's quite hard to implement and then make that happen. But well, it's quite. I mean, I think the key issue which we cannot make it real is, I think, the lack of the human resources in the rural area in Japan. Even though there are so many governmental funds go into the rural area, but I think the people in that rural area cannot handle those kind of budget to make the better services or better product. So well, it's quite difficult to answer to find. But I think if the lack of the human resource, I mean, so depopulation is quite severe, as I said. All the rich culture and behavior is losing right now. Not only like a kominka traditional architecture, but also like a human behavior. Like but I think we need to put some people to the countryside who can produce that business or who can communicate with the people, to the local people. So I think that would be the key. I mean, we have enough funding already, but no people in the countryside. I think if we can solve that problem, that would be the solution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Satoko, any view on that?
Absolutely. I do believe that when I mentioned about potential land to develop a luxury property in Japan, the key factor is actually people. So I look at the destination and ask myself, is this place attracting the younger generations? The international younger generations are one of the key defining factors. So for instance, there is a tiny town called Kamikatsu in Tokushima. So this place is all about zero waste. And so the entire town, they separate all their garbage into 48 categories to basically have zero waste. But that is not the key about this place. It's about, are you not wasting your life? Think about the time that you're spending in your life. So it's this philosophy that they're trying to communicate through this zero waste activity. And it's actually attracting many, many international younger generation people. So they're now moving into Kamikatsu, and with also the Japanese younger generation who are bilingual are living there now, connecting very closely to the elder people, and they're starting to create a tourism destination. It's a very small movement, but these are the kind of places that I would find potential.
Thank you. David, please.
Yeah, sorry about this. Ms. Hassan, I'm going to have to disagree with you, I'm afraid. What you're saying is absolutely correct in within the confines of what it is that you're saying. But if you look at a tourism strategy in 2030 that's going to be looking at between 35 and 40 million people, yes, a subset of those people want to connect with whatever it is that they want to connect with. One of the difficulties about running a strategy which is so large is that everyone says, well, what about the luxury market? Well, the luxury market is 1% of people and 20% of revenues. It's very important, but it's 1% and 20%. And what you're talking about is absolutely correct within the confines of that, but there are actually millions of people who don't want to connect with, local people, have no interest in sort of, authentic experiences, and actually just want to have a sort of cookie cutter sort of, produced by a big company view of Japanese society, or Japanese whatever, entertainment, whatever it is. And it's exactly the same as what you see in the US. I mean, there is an argument that is always put out by people working in tourism that people really want to connect with local culture. And it's absolutely true for a small and very, very visible part of the market. But, for a lot of people who go to America, they want, and, they want to eat massively outsized portions of food, and they want to go to Disneyland
and Broadway.
And Broadway.
Yeah.
And they want to have a completely stereotyped cookie cutter experience of going to America, because it fits within their view of what America should be. So they actually probably have no desire to find some connection with real American society, whatever that means in the first place. And you see exactly the same in the UK. The aristocracy is 2,000 families out of 65 million people. And when people go to the UK, they want to go to Downton Abbey. There's nothing to do with the vast majority of British society, but they want to go there anyway, because it is their view of British, or at least it's for a large number of people, it is their view of British society. So I think, and again, one has to be very, very careful. There are an enormous number of different types of tourism. In fact, there are over 50 in tourism university courses which are defined as being, sort of formally viewed as formally defined forms of tourism. And some of them really are almost embarrassing in how stereotyped they have become. The go to Venice and sit in a gondola experience. So I think from a national perspective, it's very dangerous to start talking about individual parts of the market and generalizing that to the overall market, because it's a very large, it's 11% of world GDP. It's a very large, highly complex and very, very diversified market. And you really need to get down into the data to understand each of those markets separately, because, you know, people say, well, Japan really needs a luxury market. It's a very important market, but it is, you know, it's a fifth of the overall target. It's not the whole thing.
Well, thank you. Your point well taken. So let's take a couple of questions from you in the floor as well as online, please.
Thank you. My name is Michael. I haven't heard much about the domestic market and if there's sort of changes in behavior patterns. There's something like 25 million Japanese who travel outside of Japan. If you're a repeater, you know, you get a taste of Hawaii, you may be going back there, but in the numbers you quoted, David, like 8% change. What's the consensus view if there's one on domestic tourism?
Important question. Other questions? Sakiko-san, please.
Thank you. I have a general question to David. I'm recently appointed to be an advisor for UNWTO gastrotourism for the World Forum, whatever it is, in 7 months. It happens next June. And I understand all your point. I think that's everything we should be working. But if we can prepare something for the next 7 months to host that World UNWTO symposium in Nara, what's your advice on that?
You want David to become a consultant for you. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, please.
My name is Keisuke. So actually, I visited the one very famous, ryokan in Beppu as a consultant. So actually, their owners request me to, to improve the service. So actually, I hear is the ryokan the staff. So there actually is the employee satisfaction is a very, very low. And that in addition, that is actually from their point of view that their job is a very unrespected is a job they recognize. In addition is their style is a very silo. That is a very problem. So I actually recommending the owner, but actually their owner is never change their style. So that is, I think, that's a very big problem, I think. So if you have any, is a suggestion to, change their style.
Change the mindset of the ryokan owner?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I think there was a question from online,
yes,
please.
There was one question from online participants. Knowing that the digitization is the key to grow and sustain travel and tourism, and the major online travel distribution platforms in the world are all owned by the global companies, such as Airbnb, Expedia, Booking.com, Ctrip. What should Japan do to become a leader of the global tourism industry, particularly in the APAC region?
That's a very interesting and challenging question. Okay, so who wanna pick up on the question about domestic traveler? David, thank you.
Yeah. The number of Japanese tourists traveling overseas has been decreasing for decades. And one of the main reasons for that, of course, is that the number of people of working age, 16 to 65, according to the OECD definition, has dropped. This is amazing, actually, by 12.7 million people since 1995. And so it shouldn't really be surprising that Japanese domestic and Japanese overseas tourism is continuing to go down. The number of children has gone, of babies has gone from 2.7 million to probably last year or this year, probably to somewhere around about 800,000. So, this is going to continue probably until at least 2060. So the number of people going overseas is only going to continue to decrease. wages, of course, continue to go down at the same time. So that's another problem. Domestically, Japanese domestic tourism within Japan is one of the things which for me is another issue that needs to be resolved, because it is bizarre that with 30% of the population retired, that to this day, the only time that tourism destinations are full are New Year and Golden Week and the summer. Even though a third of the population has more than enough time on their hands and more than enough money to spend time on tourism, and they are not moving. And that is a failure of the Japanese domestic tourism industry, because their view, which is this cookie cutter, let's move 50 million people through in a week, in Golden Week, and then we'll just take the rest of the year off. And the service is extremely, which is your point, the service is extremely low value added and is based purely on the fact that there is a demand which they provide a minimum service to supply. And it is a demand-driven business, not a supply-driven business, and that is an issue.
Okay. We also need to respond to at least two important questions. One is digitalization of the travel industry and the lack of strong players in that domain. And the other one was about how to change the mindset of ryokan owners. Anything you want to pick up?
I'll take the ryokan owners, if that's okay. It's very difficult, but at the same time, I think it's just a matter of seeing what's out there. So they do need to, I would recommend that the ryokan owner will take one of their key managers to experience the property, even outside of Japan, to see how a hotel can become an ambassador of a region, and the hotel staffs are actually acting as ambassadors. So they would go after the information. What's the key selling point of this region? Yufuin has such a long history. It's not just about onsen. You have a beautiful hiking trekking course, and food is great. There's so much to offer. And how could they give that to their guests? I would say that would be the start.
Thank you. Tak-san, can you pick up any one of them?
Digitalization? Or
Yeah.
It's quite difficult for me to answer, but I think the what we need to do is to find, I think, yeah, of course, there's Airbnb and then Expedia, and it's a huge company, huge services. But in terms of, we need to find something different. I think that's the key things to do, because like everybody says, we don't see the luxury market at all. And then in a specific region, we have like the value of that resource is quite nice. But
how do you attract actually inbound tourists to your place? How do you sell your products?
We mainly have like a business partner and travel agency. So I think 65% of our guests are through the travel agencies.
I see. Online or offline?
Yeah, we have our own booking system, so we can directly see my inventory and they can make an order.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what many content providers and as well as hotels should be doing. No?
When it comes to digitalization, this is probably not the question that was asked. It's not about distribution channels, but I do think that most of the Japanese hotels and even the experience providers, they need to be more visible online. That's the beginning. Even if you look into the local governments and you look into the tourism association's website, they have pretty much everything. You just change the name of the town, it's going to be another town. So they need to really differentiate themselves and identify what's their key selling point and be visible online.
I think we are very close to the end of this session. So I cannot really summarize well enough the discussion we had today, but a few takeaways for me Number one, the tourism industry really needs to handle very diverse segments, as David pointed out correctly. Both the kind of mass tourist segment, which still likes to see a kind of typical tourist experience. At the same time, the luxury tourist segments we discussed in detail with a very diverse need, who likes to connect to the local community and see the authentic content. So we need to probably cater to both to achieve our tourism industry aspiration. Number two, as we discussed in the last section of this panel, we need to strengthen significantly the digital portion of the tourism industry. David, we didn't have chance to discuss fully the digital promotion you're working with at the JNTO, but the industry as a whole lacks capability and infrastructure to promote ourselves to the world and take orders without relying on the online tourism agency, which are dominated by foreign players. So that's probably number two. And number three is the need to develop high quality accommodations, especially in rural areas. And that's where we can expect the greatest amount of revenue upside for tourism agency, because this country is full of potential high quality natural resources and cultural content. But a vast majority of the destinations with those resources lack high quality accommodations. Therefore, no way to attract luxury tourists or no way to expect good revenues for that particular destination. With that, we'd like to close the session, and please send a big applaud to the panelists. And thank you so much for joining.